First of all, I'd like to express my congratulations to the graduating class. You've all worked very hard to get where you are today, and you deserve the honor that's being awarded to you. Secondly, I'd like to point out the mistake in some of the cards that you're going to receive. You may receive a card that says something like, "This is not the end, it's only the beginning." Well, that statement is only half true. This does mark the beginning of something, but it's also the end of something. There can't be any denying of either truth. The question is this: the beginning of what? Something's ending. What is that something? And what is it that's beginning? I apologize if any parents have to go and buy another card, but this is really essential to what I'm about to say, so please forgive me. Obviously, this is the end of high school, which is a stage in your education. Some of you may think I'm not going on to college, so this isn't just a stage in my education ending, but my whole education. But I think that you'll all go on from here to another stage of your education no matter what you're doing after today. Nobody here is done yet. In fact, your parents are not finished with their education either. Neither are your grandparents or anyone else that you know, myself included. It is true that we learn something new every day, but that's not what I mean by education. What I mean has to do with the origin of the word education. And we'll come back to this question about what stage is ending, but we need to first learn what education is. In Latin, the word educate comes from two words meaning out and leading. Put the two words together and we end up with leading out or a leading forth. So education can best be seen as being led forth or being led out. And already we've reached the end of my wisdom. On my own, I have nothing but questions at this point. So it is here that I'll direct your attention to the wisdom of men greater than myself. These men are much wiser than I am, and could ever hope to be, and have expressed their wisdom much more eloquently than I could ever dream of doing. So I don't apologize for using quotes and references excessively, especially from C.S. Lewis, for the next part of this speech as we explore what education is. Plato, the 4th century BC philosopher, told a story in his book The Republic about a cave. It's a place where people are bound hand and foot, sitting down, facing away from the entrance towards the back wall of the cave, and they can't turn their heads. Above and behind them is a bonfire and a walkway where cutouts of various shapes and figures are brought in front of the fire so that the shadows of these cutouts are projected onto the opposite wall. The prisoners can only see the shadows on the wall. What they think is a tree is really just the shadow of a cutout of a tree. What they think is a dog is really just the shadow of the cutout of a dog. The prisoners don't know any better. All they know is the wall and the shadows. That's all they've ever known their whole lives. And according to Plato, the only way for a person to get out is for someone else to come and sever the bonds for the prisoners and then lead them out of the cave and into the world. But when a prisoner is released, he will probably shy away from the opening of the cave because of the brightness of the light. Their old world was more comfortable. This new world hurts the eyes and seems very strange. The trees actually have colors, brilliant, blinding, and confusing colors everywhere. The prisoner will come kicking and screaming into this brave new world, always preferring the comfort of the cave. But if the one who is leading him out is really good, the prisoner will be led forth nonetheless. Bitten and scratched as he may be, the leader knows that what he is doing is really for the good of the prisoner. Now, Plato was not a Christian, and he used this metaphor to describe his metaphysical system. I believe, however, that the cave can be used to illustrate what we believe as Christians about education or being led forth. Jesus said that he was the way, or the path, and paths always lead somewhere. To what destination does Christ lead? And away from what does he lead? Let's first think about what it is that we are being led from, then we'll take a look at how to get where we're going. C.S. Lewis writes this: I think all Christians would agree with me if I said that though Christianity seems at first to be all about duties and rules and guilt and virtue, yet it leads you on, out of all that, into something beyond. One has a glimpse of a country where they do not talk of those things except perhaps in a joke. Everyone there is filled full with what we should call goodness, as a mirror is filled with light. But they do not call it goodness. They do not call it anything. They are not thinking of it. They are too busy looking at the source from which it comes. Whatever heaven is, it will be so amazing that we utterly forget ourselves. The cave we are to be led forth from is the cave of self. Heaven's feeling will be much more like a, wow, would you look at that, than it will be, I feel so good. we will be focused outwardly. Even our best moments on this earth are those where we forget ourselves in the sheer enjoyment of something. The moment we have the thought, I am enjoying myself, we lose something. And this is completely consistent with Christ's teaching. In fact, Jesus taught this point in a very practical sentence. Anyone who wants to save his life will lose it, but anyone who loses his life for my sake will find it. So how have you been training yourself to view things? Are you more inclined to concentrate on your own feelings, desires, selfish ambitions, to harbor hate, resentment, envy? Or are you focused so much on what is outside of yourself that you almost forget yourself? If heaven really is more of a wow, look at that, then any time we leave the self behind for interest in something else, we're practicing for heaven. Again, Lewis writes, to love and admire anything outside yourself is to take one step away from utter spiritual ruin. Every time we hold things inside and brood on them and let them fester, we are practicing for hell. Lewis says, pride is a spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. Every hate and grudge we hold on to will only destroy ourselves. If we spend too much time in the cave of self, it will collapse on us. What have you been practicing? And so education ultimately is the leading out of the cave of self. How then are we led out of the cave? I think there are three things outside of the cave of self which allow us to practice forgetting ourselves: nature, people, and God. By taking an interest in any of these things, we're taking a step further out of the dungeon of self and into God's world. And this is the goal of Christian education, to say to a child, come here, step out of your cave, and look at this thing, learn about it. Do not think too much of it, but do not think too little of it either. Let it point you to Him. Regarding nature, Lewis writes, she is herself. Offer her neither worship nor contempt. Meet her and know her. I've heard it said that when we get to heaven, we will learn not that we loved things too much or too little, but that we loved things in the wrong way. As we learn how to love these things the right way, they ought to point us to God. The author of The Imitation of Christ wrote, if your heart were right, then every creature would be to you a looking glass of life and a book of holy doctrine. There is no creature so small and mean that it does not set forth the goodness of God. Probably our first steps out of the cave of self are those we take out of interest in God's creation. When we begin to step out of the cave, we see things as they really are, and they come alive. G.K. Chesterton, the Victorian journalist who heavily influenced C.S. Lewis, wrote this: there's no such thing on earth as an uninteresting subject. The only thing that can exist is an uninterested person. But even then, interest in a thing may bring it to life, but it won't have any real meaning, and we won't be loving it the right way until we allow it to point us to God. Augustine, the 4th century bishop, wrote, indeed, the knowledge of created things contemplated by themselves is more colorless than when they are seen with the wisdom of God. The next step out of the cave is love of neighbor. George MacDonald, the Scottish pastor and author, wrote, the love of our neighbor is the only door out of the dungeon of self where we mope and mow, striking sparks and rubbing phosphorescences out of the walls and blowing our own breath into our own nostrils, instead of issuing into the fair sunlight of God, the sweet winds of the universe. Christ emphasizes many times the love of others. It's the second greatest commandment. And as long as we're in the cave, we will not see real people. We'll only see shadows of people, that is, our impressions of them. Until we can really love people, we will know only our thoughts and misconception about them, instead of knowing them as they really are. And by doing this, we'll be learning to love God. Augustine wrote, by loving your neighbor, by having care for your neighbor, you are traveling on a journey. Where are you journeying except to the Lord God, whom we must love with all our heart and all our soul and all our mind? We have not yet reached the Lord, but our neighbor is with us already. So support your neighbor who is traveling with you, so that you may reach him with whom you long to dwell. Loving our neighbors is the path to God. And the final step out of the door of self is love of God. This is also the hardest kind of love to have because we can't see God. Again, commenting on the relationship between loving God and loving people, Augustine wrote, as far as teaching is concerned, the love of God comes first. But as far as doing is concerned, the love of our neighbor comes first. Whoever sets out to teach you these two commandments of love must not commend your neighbor to you first, and then God, but God first, and then your neighbor. You, on the other hand, do not yet see God, but loving your neighbor will bring you that sight. By loving your neighbor, you purify your eyes so that they are ready to see God. As John clearly says, if you do not love your brother whom you see, how can you love God whom you do not see? Theoretically, we begin with love of God, but practically, we begin with love of people. But ultimately, God is where we're headed. And that's the most exciting part. Coming out of the cave means facing the easy things like plants and animals and the things of science, along with the difficult things like God. Nothing but God will satisfy us, though. And that is the source we will all be preoccupied with and consumed by in heaven. By loving things and people the right way on earth and allowing them to point us to God, we are preparing ourselves for that ultimate vision. And so we've completed the theoretical part of this address. What is education? It is the leading out of the cave of self to God by means of His creation and our neighbors. None of us have succeeded yet in coming all the way out of the cave. We're all in process, but that is where we're headed. What we have now to deal with is the stage of your education and the practical application. In Plato's analogy, the prisoner in the cave doesn't sever his own bonds and walk out of the cave freely. Someone must come and force him out of the cave. That's how we all begin. We're all born as cute little bundles of selfishness. We kick and scream when we don't get our way, but slowly we are led a little further out of the cave. We do not do it on our own. We're lovingly led forth by our parents at first, then our relatives and other caretakers, then our friends, then our teachers and pastors. It takes a whole community to bring someone out of his cave. And for the most part, your community has been chosen for you up until now. This day marks the end of when your leaders are chosen mostly by your parents. They have decided to send you here, and the school board has very carefully selected to whom you were trusted. Your parents have had a say in whom you could be friends with and who you dated, and all these decisions were done with love. After today, you have the opportunity to choose for yourself, your new community, your new friends, your new teachers, and you can start over and start associating yourself with whoever you want. Realize this, though. Whoever you spend time with, whoever you entrust yourself to, these are the people who will either bring you more out of the cave or push you further back in, perhaps deeper than before. Choose wisely who you will allow to influence you. Your eternal destiny may hang in the balance. However, it would be a mistake to think that others are the only ones responsible for your outcome. You yourself are determining the end result with every choice you make. Lewis wrote, "Every time you make a choice, you are turning that central part of you, the part of you that chooses, into something a little different from what it was before. And taking your life as a whole with all your innumerable choices, all your life long, you are slowly turning this central thing into a heavenly creature or a hellish creature. Either into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with self, or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God and with its fellow creatures and with itself. To be the one kind of creature is heaven, that is, it is joy and peace and knowledge and power. To be the other means madness, horror, idiocy, rage, impotence, and eternal loneliness. Each of us at each moment is progressing to the one state or the other. With every thought you think, every word you say, and every muscle you move, you are preparing yourself for heaven or for hell, practicing for one place or the other. You will one day be saddled with the ultimate responsibility when standing before the throne. As Paul says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Another practical result worth pointing out is that you are responsible for how you help others out of the cave. Every time you interact with someone, you either coax them a little more out of the dungeon, or you push them further back in. To love a person is to coax them out and also participate in your own liberation. To wrong a person intentionally is to push them further into their cave and to tighten your own bonds. Lewis, in his golden sermon, The Weight of Glory, wrote, "It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses, to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you can talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare." All day long we are in some degree helping each other to one or other of these destinations. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Are you pointing people to God with the way you interact with them? Now, this is a very serious subject, but seriousness is not a reason to be somber. G.K. Chesterton wrote, The thing which is fundamentally and really frivolous is not a careless joke. The thing which is fundamentally and really frivolous is a careless solemnity. After all, we've been given the key to real life. We are promised that we will receive full, lasting joy. We will drink from and bathe in the very fountain of joy. Now, the key to the final door out of self and into heaven is nothing other than our faith in Christ. But I think that if we do these things, we can get a taste of heaven here on earth as well. If these things are worth doing, they are worth doing now. There's no reason to put off practicing for heaven, as we pray, as Jesus taught us to pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In closing, I'd like to encourage you all to choose your teachers, friends, and communities wisely. Allow God's creation to point you to Him. Love the people around you with real, sacrificial love. Forgive and ask for forgiveness. And don't be afraid to ask older, wiser people for help in making your decisions. And lastly, I look forward to seeing you all in that place where we will all finally exit the cave completely and see the source of reality as He really is.